My name is Chris, and I am the Environmental Maniac. And we're going to summarize global warming here in the next 10 minutes so that people can understand what's going to happen next. The first thing you need to understand is that I see things differently. My greatest asset is that I'm functionally dyslexic. I can assimilate information from incredibly diverse points of view and recombine it into a new whole. My greatest detriment is that I'm functionally dyslexic. Now I have to explain the new whole to linear thinkers. Linear thought is like an electric train. Dyslexic thought is like a pinball game. But I've always been one of those. In high school, they used to call it mentally gifted minor. In college, when I was a senior at UC Irvine, greenhouse gas global cooling was the problem, so I built a car that met 1986 air pollution requirements. In 1993, I created the best multifamily recycling program in the state of California. The objective was to divert half the garbage and save half on the garbage bill. That complex has now saved $350,000. They've also recycled enough newspaper and cardboard to save 50,000 trees. Currently, I figured out how to save 20 to 40% on air conditioning in houses in the desert, and something that I'm trademarking as dual plane addict, and that's what I'm excited about. But what I need to do is to keep some excitement in the movement so that when they realize that global warming ended, we don't drop the whole ball like we did back in the 70s. I am the Environmental Maniac. And what we need to understand is that greenhouse gases are not evenly distributed around the planet. That's why we came up with that graphic. You need to understand that all greenhouse gases in the troposphere. The troposphere is 12 miles thick at the equator, 0 to 4 miles thick at the poles. During the summer, the oceans warm up, they exhale greenhouse gases. There's 4 miles worth of troposphere at the pole. During the winter, the oceans cool down, they inhale gases, and the troposphere is indistinguishable. Now, if you expand that and understand that when the sun belches, the oceans warm, they produce greenhouse gases to protect the planet, that includes us. And when the sun mellows, then the oceans cool and they inhale greenhouse gases. They've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. One of the things that means is that when you do ice core samples from the poles, you're sampling in where the greenhouse gases are the thinnest and comparing it to where greenhouse gases are the thickest. What's the validity on something like that? You need to understand that the polar bears have gone through this cycle as a species. They've been gone through this cycle for thousands of years, and they'll make it again. We need to understand that the overall design of our planet is miraculous. When the sun belches, it creates greenhouse gases that protects the planet. When the sun cools, it inhales greenhouse gases so that we get more radiant heat. We need to understand that this whole global warming gloom and doom, come on, 550 years ago, the world was flat. Sail out too far, gloom and doom. 30 years ago, greenhouse gas global cooling, gloom and doom. 5 years ago, greenhouse gas global warming, gloom and doom. Well, the UN IPCC report's got an 800-pound gorilla in the middle of it. And that 800-pound gorilla is right here. Ready? Report 1. It is somewhat unsettling that the results of a complex climate model can be so dramatically altered by substituting one reasonable cloud parameterization for another, thereby approximately replicating the overall intermodal range of sensitivities. Let me simplify. They can't model clouds. And clouds are 95% of all greenhouse gases. If you can't model 95%, what good is the other 5%? We got to understand that the Kyoto Treaty, everybody who was upset because the US didn't sign the Kyoto Treaty, well, it turns out that 3 of the 4 greenhouse gases in the Kyoto Treaty have been diminishing since 2003-2005. Methane, remember when it was the big evil one? Well, that's because it's 28 times better at reflecting radiant energy than CO2. It's been diminishing since 2005. So the only one left to pick on is CO2. And why are we picking on CO2? CO2 is only 0.038% of the atmosphere. It's only increased 10% since 1950. If that entire increase is blamed on man, that's 0.0038%. That's a nickel up against a $1,000 bill. Here's another way to look at it. See this board up here? This board represents all of the greenhouse gases. See the white part? That's water vapor. See this yellow part down on the end? That's nitrogen, oxygen, all the other greenhouse gases. And let me come in close here, because can you see that little mark right there? That's CO2. Only that line is 3 times wider than would be appropriate for scale, because when I made it smaller you couldn't see it at all. We're comparing that little line. Let me zoom in. Ready? That little line up against all of that greenhouse gas and try to say there's significance, and there isn't. CO2 has never been the cause of global warming. It's only been an indicator. In science, action precedes reaction. Cause precedes effect. First, the oceans warm up. They exhale greenhouse gases. CO2 is one of them. And then the oceans cool down. They inhale greenhouse gases. So when the oceans warm up and exhale, there's more greenhouse gases in the air, and then when they cool, they start sucking them back in, and so CO2 is always lagged behind the peak of global warming. Check it out. And here's the biggest surprise. Ready? Global warming ended somewhere around 2000, between 1998 and 2000. If you go to Atlas MTS, they're a global leader on weathering testing. You want to know how long something lasts in the weather? They record daily radiant temperature, ambient temperatures, and they've been on their website since 2000. If you go and do that, you find out that there has been no increase in temperature, not even more than a 1 degree standard deviation since 2000. That's 8.5 years as nothing's been going on. What we were told is that hurricanes were a product of global warming, and they were probably right. The question now is, are tornadoes a sign of global cooling? Can't really get scientific on it because there is no accurate recording before 1950. But it makes sense if you understand that the oceans are inhaling because the planet is cooling, that they're going to be drawing cool air down, setting up a ridge along the side. It makes sense that 1998 is the date when it started, because 1999 is the record for tornadoes. So something's going on, and we got to start paying attention to it. So let's start off with a little bit of history. Now, we got to understand that we're well within the standard deviation of the planet. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings sailed to Greenland, and Greenland was green. There were grapes and vineyards north of London. All of Great Britain grew wheat. That was their staple. The castles, the great cathedrals, were all built during what they called the medieval warm period, or the climate optimum period. And then there were 5 major volcanoes. That created the Little Ice Age. It was 1 to 1.5 degrees cooler than now. Little Ice Age was nasty. Castles became cold and drafty. Glaciers came down and wiped out entire villages. The Great Britain went to the potato because they couldn't grow wheat. People starved all over Europe and Great Britain. And we remember the immortalized picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware and the ice flows in the Delaware River. Now, what's also important to understand is, according to the UN IPCC report, George Washington lived in the industrial era, because in their report they decided to pick 1750 as the start of the industrialized man. Give me a break. How much dog slobber can you stand? What we need to understand is that right now we're cooler than the medieval warm period, and warmer, thank God, than the Little Ice Age. Now, what I just told you is that the glaciers that were caused from the Little Ice Age are going to continue to decrease because we're reaching closer to the climate optimum. So that tells you what the next problem is going to be. The next problem is going to be water. And the new word we got to learn is biodegradable. Here's what's been going on for the last 100 years. From 1900 to 1950, our climate went up 0.5 degree. 1950 to 1975 went down 1/4. That was greenhouse gas global cooling. 1975 to 1998, 2000, it went up 3/8 of a degree. Oh my goodness, global warming. And it's been flat ever since. So somebody's got to figure out how come this is still in the news. The only reason global warming still exists is because it makes good news. Everybody knows that bad news sells. But what they don't know is it only sells to pessimists. And if you're not excited about the future, you're a pessimist. Everybody needs to understand that greenhouse gas global warming is a politically correct multi-billion-dollar international industry. And it's no longer based on science. In fact, it probably never was. You can't model clouds. You got an 800-pound gorilla in your model and you're going to sign off on it? That's just embarrassing. We can't put the earth in a jar. But that doesn't mean that we can't protect it. And here's the direction that I'm excited about. ROI of environmental products. Listen, if there is a product or a service that can save enough money to produce a return on investment of at least 20% a year, and those products and services are also good for the environment, they need to be implemented now. Here's a great example. Compact fluorescent lights are a no-brainer. They save so much energy that we need to start phasing them in strong, but they come with a serious risk to pregnant women and small children. If you don't know what that risk is, find part 2, or go to epa.gov/CFL cleanup and find out. It's important. And in part 2, I'll talk to you about the recycling program that's 14, 15 years old, and how it saved 50,000 trees, $350,000 for the cash. That's worth paying attention to. And then my greatest excitement right now is the 1 quadrillion BTU project. I figured out how to save 20 to 40% on air conditioning through the use of a new program that I'm trademarking as dual plane attics that will reduce air conditioning by 20 to 40%. In the process, save the country a quadrillion BTUs of energy, equivalent to 17 million barrels of oil. The summary on this is that, listen, we only have one planet, we got to take care of it, but we also have to remember the people who live here, and the next big one to consider is going to be water.